It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here, of course, on this Wednesday midweek edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your work day. It is great to have you all here. Oh, hey, also a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast as well in Canada, the U.S., or beyond. It is great to have you with us. Well, today on the program, interesting stuff. We're going to talk to Carlo Dade of the Canada West Foundation. He wrote an interesting column for a publication in Latin America talking about trade and some of the concerns, or maybe lack of concerns, he has for something like the Mexico-Canada-U.S. trade agreement, the USMCA, or in Canada they call it the CUSMA. And, what's in store for that agreement? Also, we're going to talk a little bit about the CPTPP as well. We've also got Pam de Rocquigny. Now, she is with the Manitoba Crop Alliance. They have a new strategic plan that they just worked on. Lindsay is going to talk to her about that. And then we're going to have a new episode of the Farm Safety Roundup. Nicole Sherman will be with us, and she's going to talk about chemical safety. Lots of chemicals around the farm, but are you making sure in a busy time of year like this that you're taking care of everything and keeping yourself and others safe? If you have any feedback, send us an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. And for those of you that sent me a bunch of emails and texts wondering why I didn't talk about the Oilers' victory yesterday, I'm sorry. We were busy. But yes, very deserving win by the Oilers in Game 7 over the Canucks. We'll see how they make it with Dallas. Good NHL playoffs. It's been very, very entertaining. But yes, Edmonton definitely deserved to win. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we got Carlo Dade right after this.
I am Lindsay Smith. Joining me to talk about Manipulator PGR is Jamie Stringham, National Sales Manager for Belgium, Canada. Why is now a good time to choose Manipulator PGR?
A product needs to provide positive return on investment for you, a producer. What's the point of even using it? Manipulator's been around in Canada now. It was first registered on wheat in 2014. Here we are at 2024. We're registered for wheat, barley, and oat. And we've seen excellent results under a variety of crop conditions. Benefits of harvestability, yield bump, lodging protection, widest window of application of any PGR in Canada. All that being said, it's a simple answer. Don't take my word for it at all. You need to try Manipulator on your farm, see how it works with your schedule, what kind of return it gives you on your investment. Talk to your retailer, split a couple of fields, measure carefully your yield difference, your harvesting ease difference, and your lodging difference. And, I know if you try it, you'll be really happy with the results.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch WheatPete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Wednesday. And let's talk about some trade issues that Canada is very much in the middle of. And hopefully some good news. We're joined right now by Carlo Dade of the Canada West Foundation. Hey, Carlo, how's it going?
Good, Shaun. Good to see you. We've got rain. So, yeah, good news.
Yeah, it can rain in southern Alberta. This is amazing, Carlo. Who knew?
Well, you knew. Anyone who's driven through knows.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, you wrote an article for the Latin America Advisor. Now, I'm not a regular reader of this publication, but I did see it on the Canada West Foundation website. And you were talking about the USMCA, the CUSMA, North American Trade Agreement, and and the review that is coming up. And obviously this is a very, very important trade deal to Canada and the other two countries as well, quite frankly. What are your thoughts or things that our audience needs to be aware of as we head here into a U.S. election this fall?
Sure. Great question. And Shaun, I'm glad that you're following this. You're one of the sources that really, I think, helps to keep the public up on this issue. So good on you for keeping it front and center. And just a quick note, the advisor is actually a good piece of information if you've got listeners who export in the Americas. They cover Canada down to the tip of Tierra del Fuego. So it's actually an Americas publication. But here's the issue. In the article, I note some of the major issues in the agreement, such as genetically modified corn. Mm-hmm. And folks follow our publications at Canada West, they'll know that Mexico is attempting to ban white corn or genetically modified corn for human consumption. They've allowed yellow corn in for which is primarily animal feeding. But if we have a GMO ban in North America, what does this say about our attempts to prevent bans in other jurisdictions with which we trade? So this is an issue that's ongoing. The U.S. brought a case against Mexico, Canada joined, and that's ongoing. We have voluntary country of origin labeling. We have rules for content in automobiles. Mexico is attracting significant investment in electric vehicles from China. And in Canada, well, we're overrun with Chinese EVs now. They're called Teslas. So that's an issue that's sure to come up. The Americans are really upset at us over what they perceive as lack of enforcement of an agreement to ban goods made with forced labor from coming into North America. Now, when they say forced labor, they mean the Uyghur Autonomous Region of China. This is an act targeted at China. The Americans claim to have seized over 3,000 shipments. Canada is, I think, at -1. And there are various reasons for this. It's not as bad as it sounds, but the Americans don't care about the reasons. They think we're not serious, and I think that's going to be the #1 issue that comes up. And then, of course, dairy. The Americans have made it clear that we're in for a good old ass whooping at the negotiating table when it comes to dairy.
So what are your expectations? And obviously we don't know who the players are here yet. We're going to have a Mexican election here very shortly. We've got the U.S. election this fall, and of course the Canadian election. Who knows when that happens, but it has to happen before by October of 25. And this agreement isn't up for review, or at least where people, the countries have to say, hey, we want to review this or keep it. That is July 1st of 26. So there is some time, but we can have 3 different faces that are part of this whole thing. Is it hard to speculate on what could happen without knowing who those players are?
No, I don't think so. It's the structure of the issues. The negotiations and the deal making will, of course, depend somewhat on personalities, but largely these are structural issues, and I would expect them to go through the normal processes, and there'll be histrionics. There'll be yelling and screaming. There'll be people rending shirts and pulling out their hair in the media, other commentators as such. But I would urge your listeners to think about it this way. I'm not worried about this, because with a trade agreement, you have to realize that these sorts of irritants and these sorts of negotiations are a feature. They're not a flaw. When you conduct a trade negotiation to sign an agreement, congratulations, you've done half the work. It's not, okay, agreement's done, let's forget about that and go on and trade. No, you have to constantly work at keeping the agreement going, fixing irritants that come up. A trade agreement does not remove irritants. It gives you a forum, a framework, a series of procedures and rules under which to negotiate and mitigate those irritants. So the fact that we have irritants is what I'd expect. I think we're close enough in North America. The trade professionals in each country are strong enough that they can handle these sorts of agreements. It's not going to be easy. There'll be a lot of angst in the public, but I think at the end of the day, the systems we've established in North America are strong enough. And one symbol of that is this week.
Yeah.
The trade ministers
Yeah.
from each of the three countries are meeting in Phoenix, Arizona, probably as we're speaking. Marianne, Raquel Buenrostro, and Catherine Tai, three women, by the way, are meeting to work on the agreement and to iron out issues. So I think people aren't aware of this background work. And with the new NAFTA agreement, this annual meeting is new. We didn't have it under the previous North American agreement, but one of the improvements in the new one is that the trade ministers shall meet once a year to deal with these sorts of issues and try and keep things from being problems.
But they're talking about the issues, but are we like resolution on them though? Like, and do we have to have resolution prior to July of 26?
Are we going to finally resolve softwood before July of 2026? So look, some issues we just keep kicking down the can down the road. Others we have resolution. But my previous comment about not being worried can't be taken for complacency. And my worry isn't that we can't deal with the issues, but my worry is that in Canada, we think, okay, agreement signed, we're done, we can go home. And I worry that we haven't invested in the ongoing diplomacy, economic and trade diplomacy with the U.S. to prevent issues, to assure that when they do pop up, we have allies. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of money. And that's why the Cattlemen's Association has a representative in Washington, D.C. That's why we're members of the State and Agriculture World Leaders Association. We do a lot, but I would argue in this day and age, we need to do even more of that.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Now, let's talk about the CPTPP. We've got a commission that's happening, and Canada is actually the chair of it. What exactly is this?
So it's sort of like the Free Trade Commission that's part of the North American agreement. So with the new agreement, it was mandated that the responsible government official in each country, the trade minister, meet at least once a year to work on issues that come up with the agreement. You need maintenance. It's like your car. You have to take your car into the shop occasionally, even if nothing's wrong, to make sure that it keeps going. We have something similar with the CPTPP. Each year, one of the economies, you can't say country because Taiwan wants to join, but each year, one of the economies hosts the other countries, so again, the trade minister from the other countries, to talk about how the agreement's working. What sort of things do we need to improve? And with the CPTPP, there was I think, 3-year review of the agreement that's just come in. So Canada is a very important host in that we have the review of the agreement, and do we need to tweak it, modify it, make changes? And then, of course, there's the applications by China, Ecuador, Taiwan, Costa Rica, and Uruguay to join the agreement. Those are going to take years to work out. It's not going to happen under Canada's watch, but we will make important steps to determining the rules or tweaking the rules for new members to come in.
Hey, Carlo, have you been hearing anything about the Canada-UK deal, and whether is that just friends off for now, or what's the status of that? Have you been following that?
Yeah, it's hands off. I think the British Prime Minister kind of walked into a bit of trouble with the UK-Australia agreement, and people may not know this when they see the British PM and they see him. They may not realize that he comes from a deep, deep farm district, and he really cheesed off, pardon the pun, agricultural interest in the UK. So for, I think, the sake of keeping his own riding, he had to slow down with the Canada-UK agreement. But look, we got everything we need, at least in ag, in the TPP agreement. I don't count beef. The beef complaints, to my mind, the beef industry's got more business than they know what to do with. We've got Mexican beef in Canada because we can't keep up with demand for beef in Canada, or at least lower cost beef. So I think other than beef, we got everything we needed in the TPP agreement, and I'm fine with just going on with the TPP agreement. Britain as part of the TPP as opposed to a separate bilateral agreement with Britain.
Our guest here today is Carlo Dade of the Canada West Foundation. We've got more coming up with Carlo when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
We have the financial tool you're looking for. A cash advance from Canadian Canola Growers Association is a financial tool for farmers that offers flexible short-term financing. Borrow your first $250,000 interest-free in 2024 and the rest below prime. Put your advance to work in whatever ways make sense for your operation. Apply on over 50 commodities. Call our experienced team or visit ccga.ca. Cash advances are made under the Government of Canada's Advance Payments Program.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
We're going to continue our conversation with Carlo Dade of the Canada West Foundation. But first, we've got an important notice for grain farmers. The Canadian Grain Commission has revoked the licenses of Global Food and Ingredients, Inc., also known as GFI. Now, if this company owes you money for grain deliveries, you need to call this number, 1-800-853-6705, and do that immediately. This is a message from the Government of Canada. Let's continue our conversation with Carlo Dade of the Canada West Foundation. Yeah, what I've been hearing a lot, just switching back to the U.S. here, is what I've been hearing a lot of concern in people that I know well around D.C. talking about how just the increase in protectionism on both sides of the aisle. Obviously on the Democrat side as well as the Republican side, with the tariffs. We saw a new set of tariffs on China last week. It's good business, political business in the U.S. right now to talk tough on trade with China. Do you feel that Canada is going to very clearly be, whether it's told directly or indirectly, choose a side? Do you feel that that's coming as it applies to this triangle of Canada, the U.S., and China?
Yeah, so there are two issues with tariffs. The first is the triangle one. Canada getting caught in the trade war between the U.S. and China, the political confrontation. I've actually got a piece hopefully coming out in the next week or two that talks about that. I wrote an academic chapter for a book just on that. And it's germane for this audience because in the past, it's been agriculture that's really been thrown under the combine when the Americans raised security concerns on trade. If you think back to the 1950s, the Americans and the West had an embargo on China. We broke that embargo to sell grain to China. The Americans have been stealing markets from us in Europe and Africa. We managed to get the Chinese market. The Americans told us to leave. We said no. It was also China's greatest famine. 3 million people died, and you shouldn't be cutting grain at that time. But the Americans, President Kennedy prevented Canadian or grain ships from being fueled at the port of Vancouver. So when we get caught in these security issues, it's agriculture that tends to get hurt. With the North American agreement, you remember Section 3210 of the agreement. The Americans told us, don't you dare think about negotiating with China. We didn't, but what were the Americans doing behind our back? Signing a Phase 1 agreement with China that gave Americans specific, unique rules advantages in terms of trade that took agricultural share from us. So yeah, I am deeply, deeply worried about that, mostly because no one remembers 3210. And no one's thinking about what happened. I don't hear the ag community yelling and screaming that the Americans shivved us in the back with that security concern about China. So I don't think we're prepared as a nation to stand up to the Americans the way Diefenbaker did in the 1950s. He stood up to Eisenhower. He stood up to Kennedy for the prairies and for the agricultural community. I just don't see any Diefenbakers out there today.
Yeah. Well, don't you think that we can stand up for our interests to a certain point, but Canada really needs trade with the U.S. We're really in a vulnerable position here. As protectionism rises in the U.S., it puts Canada in a really tough spot from an economic standpoint. Does it not?
It does. And the room for maneuver that Diefenbaker had in the 50s was much greater than the room for maneuver we have today. The room for maneuver that Chrétien, Prime Minister Chrétien, had when he refused to go to Iraq was greater than the room for maneuver we have today. It's going to be difficult. I don't have an easy answer to this. I can simply look back at history, look at current circumstances, and urge my fellow analysts and folks like yourself to start thinking and talking about this. What can we do? But to simply wave the white flag, I'm not ready for that quite yet.
Not yet.
We got to do some thinking and some working first. But remaining engaged in the U.S. Sorrel, buddy out in Northern Virginia with the state agricultural organization. Those are the types of ties we have to have, and a coordinated response from the prairies on this would really be nice, rather than premiers going down idiosyncratically and trade ministers going down idiosyncratically. You know, our own Team Canada approach on the prairies that looks after ag probably couldn't hurt.
Yeah, good luck. Good. Everybody wants the photo op. Each of the provinces wants to look like they're leading the charge for their province, not necessarily, the prairie benefit as a whole. That's.
I still, deep in my heart, hold the belief that politicians will do the right thing by their constituents, and especially by agriculture.
Yeah. Hey, Carlo, really do appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining us here today on the show. Really, it's awesome to hear from you again.
Hey, and if folks are interested in the Mexican election, we're going to have a deep dive into the election a week or two after it's over.
Nice.
So there are lots of ag issues there. The GMO corn issue, we'll be able to dive into that. I've got friends in Mexico, fellow members of the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations, and analysts who will be joining us. So you'll hear it straight from the Cabello.
Yeah, well, it fits into the conversation we just had, because immigration, the southern border is going to be a big piece, I think, of it's going to get roped into the trade discussion. There's no doubt about it. Hey, Carlo, thanks so much. We'll talk to you later.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Oh, and
that is Carlo. He looks good in his hoodie for those of you watching on YouTube. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM right after this.
Dad, we missed the window for a PGR in our cereals.
Why didn't you add it to the herbicide?
What?
With Manipulator PGR, we can apply as early as one tiller. Just add it to the herbicide, no separate pass.
Don't miss out. Manipulator PGR is proven in wheat, durum, barley, and oats to shorten plants and even out the main stem and tillers. This results in reduced lodging risk, improved harvest efficiency, and increased yield. Talk to your crop protection retailer for more info and to confirm acceptable tank mixes.
CDC Endure is a new oat line from Alliance Seed. High yielding with excellent disease resistance and the quality end users ask for, all in one great oat variety. CDC Endure provides the high beta-glucan levels to make heart-healthy products like breakfast cereals. For more information on CDC Endure oats, as well as any other products from Alliance Seed, check out allianceseed.com or visit any Alliance Seed authorized retailers.
All right, welcome back to Real Agriculture and RealAg Radio. Joining me now is Pam de Rocquigny. She's the CEO of the Manitoba Crop Alliance. Pam, welcome here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, so exciting times over at the Manitoba Crop Alliance, but let's catch everybody up in case they're not aware. Who or what is your organization?
Manitoba Crop Alliance, coming up to 4 years of operation. Obviously, we were formed from an amalgamation of our 5 founding organizations, and we represent wheat, both spring and winter, barley, sunflowers, corn, and flax. There we go. I think I listed them out of order than I normally did, so I confused myself almost there. But so 5 crop types, and coming up to 4 years of operation on August 1st. So it's kind of hard to believe it's been 4 years already.
It has gone very quickly. As someone, I can only imagine for you, but as someone sort of on the outside, the amalgamation discussion was a long one, and I think it worked well. It moved forward, but these things do take time. And then in the blink of an eye, here we are, 4 years of these 5 groups coming together to form one organization. Now, when that amalgamation happened, there was, of course, sort of an initial strategic plan, a vision for what this amalgamation would look like in the beginning stages. As you move forward, of course, it's time for sort of a new look at the next chunk of time of where this organization is going to go. And you've launched that strategic vision, that strategic plan. Tell me a bit about that process of getting there, of putting this plan together. What did that look like?
Yeah, it's actually been a really great process. And you summed it up quite nicely with respect to, when we amalgamated, we did have kind of our first strategic plan, and the consultant we worked with actually pointed out to us, like, and it was for deliberately, I don't know if we did it deliberately, but it actually happened where we used the word continue a lot in our first strategic plan. And I think it was more of a reflection of just making sure that the farmer members, that we were reassuring them that we were going to continue to do the things that we said we were going to do throughout the consultation and leading up to the amalgamation. You guys gave us the go-ahead as farmer members. You know what? We're still going to focus on research and production, market development and access, strong communications, and of course, a strong entity as well in terms of a governance and a strong foundation. So, there was a lot of continues within that first strategic plan, and that was great. And I think it provided us that solid base to kind of get our feet underneath ourselves. And not only that, but this all happened during a global pandemic. So our members voted in February of 2020, and literally like a month later, the world changed slightly. And we all went into lockdown and those types of things. And in hindsight, it actually allowed us to really, get a strong foundation in terms of policies and procedures and, those types of things that we might not have had time to do, but did have time because everybody was doing their thing in terms of, isolating and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I think it was really an opportune time for us to really lead that, lead us into where we needed to be. We're here now, 4 years in, and we realized, now it's really time for us to what's going to move the needle? What's going to take us, take our farmer members to the next level? Like what additional value can we provide to them? Mm-hmm. And that's really where these discussions started in terms of what does our next 3 years look like as Manitoba Crop Alliance. And so in February of this year, of 2024, all of our delegates from all of our crop committees got together in Brandon, and we had a session with a consultant. And we kind of really, did a bunch of exercises as you normally do when you're going through a strategic planning session. And that laid a really solid foundation. And then in March, our board of directors got together for another 1.5-day session, took all of that insight, all of that knowledge from all of our crop delegates to say, okay, now what does it look like? What does our strategic plan look like? And resulting from that is the document that we shared with our farmer members and industry as well. In our May Heads Up e-newsletter, saying, here's our 3 big goals that we really want to achieve over the next 3 years. And here's, step goals under each of those goals in terms of the things that we want to do under each of them to really accomplish that big goal. So it's, clear, concise, really high level, and we understand that as strategic plans often are. But I think it kind of gives, hopefully, our farmer members a vision as to, we really want to take things to the next level. All while, like I said, bringing additional value to them as our farmer members.
So, and this is one thing that I think for anyone who's seen it, and you can head on over to the Manitoba Crop Alliance website or RealAgriculture.com as well. We'll have it there as well. You've distilled it down to a one-page PDF. It's got 3 big goals across the top, and then, as you mentioned, you've got sort of those sort of stepping stones underneath. Was it very much a conscious choice to stay that streamlined? Because you're 5 groups into one. And now it's right. And now it's doing big stuff outwards. So really focusing on 3 key things. We will talk about what each of them are, but from that perspective of how important was it or how deliberate was it to stay that focused?
It was very deliberate. We can always be as ambitious as we want. We could have had 10 big goals. We could have done a whole bunch of other things, but we're talking about a 3-year time span. And obviously, we just earlier talked about like how fast 4 years went. So 3 years is a long period of time, but really not long period of time. And it's like, really, what can we do in this time period? What's achievable? What metrics can we assign to them so that, after 3 years, we can say, here's where we are, here's what we've accomplished, and then bite off the next chunk of time in terms of, so it was very deliberate to have that one pager. Easy to reference, easy to look at and say, here's our vision that we're headed towards over the next 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, so we're going to touch on the 3 of them just briefly. I want to start though with number 2, is discover and fund groundbreaking research. I love that you've actually articulated not just research, groundbreaking. So what might that look like? Do you already have ideas of where you're going to focus those research dollars?
We have some ideas for sure, definitely. And I think obviously as an organization that is very research, we want to be seen as leaders in research. And you look at our budget, 65% of our annual budget every year goes towards research and production. That is a major reason as to why Manitoba Crop Alliance exists, is to fund research, to fund variety development, to really find solutions for those challenges and problems that farmers are facing. So it was logical that research was going to be one of our big goals, because that is just why we're here in the first place. But we really wanted to take a look at, we've got a really great program established. We work really collaboratively with other organizations, both within our province and outside of our province. We have those great relationships. But like, what can we do next? Like, what capacity can we build here in Manitoba to really like lead us forward, just not as a province, but to support our farmer members? And we look at some of the crop types that we have, the smaller acreage crops like sunflowers and flax. Like, how can we provide support to those crop types, that actually aren't largely grown outside of our province? Mm-hmm. You look at sunflowers, majority of it's grown here in the province. Okay. You look at flax, obviously our neighbors to the west and Sask Flax, they're big partners of ours. But you look elsewhere, there's not that capacity. And so then when you don't have that capacity, it's hard to get the research done that you're wanting to get done in those crop types. So how can we start to make some investments and fund some of that groundbreaking work that we want to do in these crop types that deserve it in a space where, perhaps there's not that capacity at this point. So I think those are kind of the things that we're really looking at in that kind of bigger goal, is how can we start, really making those investments in capacity within our province.
Mm-hmm. Now, your third goal or third stated goal is to explore areas for bold investment that unlocks hidden potential and fuels historic progress. So building on that, and I can see where it does. There's, in the step goals, there's a lot of focus on the value add, on where, you may see some advancement for these crop types within the province. How key was this one in these discussions that farmers brought up about adding value to their crops within Manitoba borders?
Well, I think we see that obviously, and there's often lots of discussion about, the value added piece. How can we just not produce the great raw product that we do? And our farmers are great at it. They produce high quality grains that are used domestically or exported to end use customers around the world. So, what other value added opportunities could there be? And I think it's also just a reflection of, and to be honest with ourselves, what are the opportunities? Because we often talk about value added How can we get these, processing facilities or those, but we need to also be honest with ourselves in terms of, is there a fit? If not, that's fine. But let's move on from that discussion then, or if there is opportunities, what needs to be done? And perhaps that will also then funnel into our research program. It's like, there are opportunities, but guess what? We need to fund this piece or solve the issues here that our research program then can step in and say, here we go. Here's a problem that we can solve in order to take advantage of that opportunity. So I think when you start to look at some of these, step goals, they all kind of start to tie in together with each other at some point or potentially at some point.
Mm-hmm. And then the first, but we'll end on this one, is really ramping up that communication piece and learning about how your farmers want to learn about these things, how your organization can communicate. This one's near and dear to my heart, but it's one of those ones that I think a lot of producer groups really struggle with. You do all this work, but it's really important that your farmer members know what's happening or, stay up to date and all those sorts of things. So what might this look like going forward as far as that communications piece?
Yeah, and I think this was, and perhaps potentially maybe there was no rhyme or reason as to which one was big goal 1, 2, or 3. It just happened to be how the workshop went. But obviously we recognize, and the farmers sitting around the table, we have 7,700 farmer members. And we can guarantee you not every single one of those farmer members even knows who Manitoba Crop Alliance is. So there's a wide breadth of knowledge as to who we are and what we do. And we think we've also made changes already to our communications program and trying to reach out to them in different ways, either through social media. We have 3 publications that are directly mailed to them. We have field days. We have very specific events where they can come see us in person. We hold Crop Connect, with our partner organizations. We see all these opportunities, and it's how do we learn how our farmers want to engage with us? What do they want? How can we deliver on that? Because we can fund all this great research, but if the results aren't getting into the hands of our farmer members to utilize on their farms, we're really missing a critical piece in that. So how do we, innovate our program to make sure we're reaching more of our farmers? And I think working through each of the step goals, I think that will become clear. We're not trying to figure out what it is right now. We're going to work through a process, and hopefully at the end of the first year, we'll have our aha moment, hopefully. But we're dealing with farmers who are very busy, and our attentions are being pulled in multiple directions. So how do we get in there? How do we make sure that they know what we're doing? So. Yep.
All right. Okay, Pam, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. This is fantastic. And Manitoba, what's the website that people can find the Manitoba Crop Alliance so that if somebody wants to take a look at the strategic plan, they may?
Yeah, no, it's definitely on our website. Just click, you'll find it easily. And if you haven't, sign up for our Heads Up e-newsletter as well. You'll get it directly to your inbox second Wednesday of every month. So that's one way to keep in tune in terms of what we're doing. So.
Okay. That communications piece, so important. All right, Pam, thanks so much.
Sorry, shameless plug.
Yeah, it's totally allowed.
That's totally cool. There you go.
Coming up next, we got another episode of the Farm Safety Roundup. Super important this time of the year to talk about farm safety, and we'll do that when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, of course, on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Choose Viatude fungicide and unleash best-in-class sclerotinia protection in canola and premium protection against white mold in soybeans. Viatude contains a powerful premix of Onmira Active and Prothioconazole. This unique combo delivers high-performance disease control, crop safety, mix compatibility, resistance management, and advanced mobility for excellent coverage and superior plant protection. Choose Viatude fungicide for stronger, more vigorous crops.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights, live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
This season on the Farm Safety Roundup, we've looked at the hazards associated with many of the tools of the trade farmers utilize to get the job done. And we've talked about the controls needed to address those hazards to keep farm workers safe. Today's focus is on another necessity for farm operators, and we're talking about chemicals. Now, where there are chemicals, there are multiple concerns, from transportation storage to handling and exposure to potential spills and disposal. Today's guest is Nicole Sherman. She's a health and safety consultant with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services, here to share some guidance on this very, very important topic. From maintenance to crop protection, chemicals on the farm can be dangerous. We used to look for a skull and crossbones on labels, but honestly, chemical identification has come a long way. Nicole, what are some of the main types of chemicals to be aware of?
Yeah, on farms, the exposure to chemicals happens all year round, and it, maybe depends on the season we're in or the commodity that is being farmed, but a lot of the types of chemicals that we see, number one is fuels, right? Certain gas, diesel, maybe mixed fuels or propane. Pesticides are a big one, such as herbicides, fungicides, and insecticides. Fertilizers, anhydrous ammonia, right? That's a really dangerous one. And I think of many examples where, farmers have went to check the tank, and unfortunately, you think you can hold your breath or, check it and look, and all of a sudden that waft of chemical comes out into the air, and that's a nasty one. And a lot of farmers have lost their lives as a result of exposure to that. Also, I think a lot of farms have their own machine shops on site. We're doing our own repairs, right? We're mechanics when it comes down to it as well sometimes. So lots of solvents, lubricants, maybe even some welding happening. So maybe gas under pressure like acetylene. So there's lots of different chemicals that we're exposed to as far as the synthetic side. There's natural and organic chemicals too. We won't talk about those today, such as the silo gas and manure gas or grain dust. A colleague of mine, Dean Anderson, did an excellent podcast with you back on hazardous atmospheres, and there was a great discussion about those then. So those are what I think are some of the real common ones that we'd see on farms.
Yeah, I think a lot of the audience is very familiar with a lot of those being on their farms, so there is stuff to be aware of here. So how do these chemicals enter the body, and once they do, what type of symptoms should a farm worker look out for, and absolutely not ignore and just brush off?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so important to know, what it is that we're dealing with. And I'll talk about it probably a couple times through our conversation about, knowing the safety data sheet. But certainly, what form is that chemical coming in? Is it a solid? Is it a liquid or a gas? And, depending on that state, how does it enter the body? So are we inhaling it? So that is, there's powder in the air, or there's mist or vapors in the air, and we're breathing that in. That's the number one way chemicals enter into the body, or potentially absorption through the skin, depending on the chemical. Maybe we've ingested it. And I don't think we're obviously intentionally trying to ingest chemicals by any means, but in a way we have our coffee mug or our water bottle sitting out on the workbench or a certain area of the barn, and chemicals maybe are in the air, and as they fall down, they filter onto our cups and drinking containers and such, and then we inevitably then ingest that chemical. So it's so important to be cognizant of that. And the other way too is injection. So if we get poked with something, or pressurized liquids in lines and things like that, that's a way for them to enter the body as well. You're so right in that and I think farmers are very resilient. We are under pressure, we are under stress, and we need to get the job done. It's so important not to ignore what our body is telling us, that maybe something has gone wrong. So things like respiratory symptoms, like shortness of breath, coughing, irritations in the nose and throat, headaches, nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness. There can be other things too, such as, feeling those rashes or irritations on the skin or chemical burns. And for some of us, it can have such dire effects, detrimental effects such as death in seconds and minutes. And we may be even unaware of the hazard. So don't ignore those symptoms. If you start to feel them, get out of the area, get to fresh air, get to a well-ventilated area and kind of reevaluate the situation. What are the next steps? Do I need care? And if you are experiencing these symptoms, it's probably a sign that we probably don't have the right controls in place. So we need to reevaluate and think, what should we be doing better going forward?
So how can farmers stay safe when handling some of these chemicals? Because they are going to be on the farm. They're a part of daily life. So how do we protect ourselves?
Yeah, such a good question, right? We can't avoid the interaction with humans and chemicals. It's just how do we keep ourselves safe? And the one big thing that we always like to promote is the whole idea of stop, think, and act. So, you want to recognize am I being exposed to? What tasks am I going to be doing today? Assess what is that work? Am I doing maintenance and repair? Am I applying pesticides or anhydrous today? Am I refueling equipment? So do I have the right equipment? Is it in good working order? That's big. And do I have the proper PPE, which my safety data sheet will drive that as to what I need to be wearing, whether it's gloves or, chemical splash goggles or face visor or aprons and things like that. Do I maybe need a second person, right? If this is a pretty hazardous chemical that I'm working with, should someone else be nearby? And am I prepared in case of an emergency? So, even thinking, am I in the right state of mind, both, physically and mentally as well, before I get into this task?
Nicole, what safety controls should be considered, and are there some that should be considered better or more of a priority than some of the others?
Yeah, for sure. We definitely have controls that are better than others. I will say this, we do know that farms fall under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And a lot of times they fall to the, taking every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of our workers. There is also a general duty to make sure that, employers are providing information, instruction, and supervision to protect those workers and their health and safety. Chemicals has a lot of, heavy legislation. And while we know farms don't necessarily have many regulations that apply to them, there is, legislation under the Act with specific reference to toxic substances. So employers need to make sure that, where workers are exposed to toxic substances, that they are controlled. Toxic substances in the workplace need to be clearly identified, which means we need to be doing some proper labeling. And also workers receive enough information to be able to handle them safely, which means we need to have the training. So as we look at that and how this applies to what we like to call a hierarchy of controls, there are controls that certainly are better than others. When we look to, doing our due diligence, are we able to eliminate that chemical or that process? We always start there, and if we can't eliminate it, that's okay. Let's move down that hierarchy to the next best option, which may be substitution. So can we substitute out the more harmful chemical for one that's less hazardous? Or maybe this chemical comes in pellet and powder form. Your pellet form may be the best option, as the powder may become more aerosolized. The other option too, then, as we work down the hierarchy, is engineering. So a lot of times we talk about ventilation, and are we either able to be outside as far as that goes, or maybe do we need mechanical ventilation that pulls that dirty air away from our breathing space? And then we look at awareness, and awareness, I will kind of drive back to the point of where, while the WHMIS Regulation 860 does not fall under farms, it is a very good best practice to be following to do our due diligence, which just means we need to be providing our workers education and training. Do they know those pictograms, right? Do they know the core information on a safety data sheet, which is how can this chemical harm me? How do I protect myself? What PPE do I need to wear? And if there's an emergency, what's my next steps? So it's not getting into the whole chemistry of the chemical, but just what do I need to know from that information to keep me safe? in those cases too, there may be signage and things that could warn us of, chemical storage and things like that. If we look at our administrative controls, it's great to have an inventory of your chemicals on the farm, okay? So what do I have on the farm? Do I have a safety data sheet? Is it available and accessible to all my workers? Am I properly labeling? Supplier labels may come in. If I'm decanting into another container, then, ensuring that I put a label on that container. And I will very much suggest right now that we're not using drinking containers, food containers, where I've got a little bit of, this spray left over and I'm going to put it in this peanut butter jar, right? We have had so many awful situations where colored liquids, clear liquids are going into water bottles, drinking containers, like different hydration drinking containers. And, people are drinking those, and it's quite devastating as to what happens. And then
that's
PPE.
Nasty. Ooh.
Yeah, for sure. And PPE is kind of our last line of defense. We can't get around it, but, we have to kind of look at layering in those other controls. So, gloves, respirators, potentially aprons, that eye and face protection, long sleeves, pants, those types of things as well. So,
Nicole, when there's a lot of dangers on the farm, and when a danger is like a one-time occurrence, like say flood, we're on high alert, right? Or high wind. Like there's something that doesn't happen every day. But when we're around these kinds of products on a daily basis, we have to kind of fight human nature, which is being complacent, right? And complacency it just talk about that for a second as we wrap up.
It is important to make sure that we don't become complacent. We need to make sure that we use these chemicals on a regular basis. Are we prepared in case of an emergency, right? So do we know what chemicals we're using? What is our emergency response plan? Who has responsibilities within that? Even connecting with your local fire department, having them on site, knowing where your chemicals are stored, what you're using. Okay. Maybe do I need an emergency eye wash or shower on site based on the chemicals? Your safety data sheets will tell you that as well. Be prepared in case of that emergency. And I think that as well, just because we've done something in the past without issue does not make it safe. So just because the exposure to chemicals on farms is that regular occurrence, it doesn't mean that the harmful effects from those chemicals is something that should just be accepted, right, as part of the job. And we get one body and one life, and it is so important to make sure that we take care of it. And because if we don't, what's all this for at the end of the day? We want to be able to enjoy the fruits of our labor when it comes to retiring, going on vacation, spending time with our loved ones and friends and family. We don't want to be experiencing chronic bronchitis, cancers, skin rashes and irritations that can last a lifetime as a result to exposure to these chemicals. So my main takeaway is to make sure that we're doing what is right and what is safe for you and all of your workers right now on your farm, and to ensure that we're in the moment protecting our health and safety now, because that really has a long-lasting effect on what our future could be as a result too. So
super important information there. Really appreciate Nicole joining us here today on the program. Well, if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can find us across all the different social media platforms. Or if you're so inclined, why not call the RealAg feedback line? That number is 855-776-6147. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we will chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.